Welcome to the Zen Ways podcast with our teacher Daizan.
So as human beings, we have some very powerful drives that underline or underpin our system. For example, we've got a very powerful drive to survive. And if you read accounts of concentration camp survivors and so on, some of the most inspiring stories are people who've been willing to overcome their drive to survive in order to allow somebody else to do so. And we perhaps have a very natural sort of respect for people who do that. Now we also have a very powerful drive towards happiness. As human beings, we want to find happiness. Now, many of our drives, if you like, are almost automatically fulfilled through life. But the drive to happiness is not quite the same as the others. So let's kind of unpack this a little bit. When I went to Japan and studied with my teacher, Shinzen Roshi, very, very early on, when I arrived, they had the festival of the Buddha's birthday, and in Japan they have a particular festival with a little baby Buddha statue and so on, and a ceremony and so on. And Shinzen Roshi is not very keen on ceremonies and all that, so actually we went out into the bamboo grove and dug bamboo roots to eat for lunch, rather than doing this. I remember he made a very, very particular point about this. He said, "This is how you make a baby Buddha," digging bamboo roots up. But I remember he sat me down and he sort of told me this story, and he said how every baby that's born, in a sense, is a baby Buddha. Is a baby Buddha. Every baby that's born, in a sense, has no option other than to be an absolutely perfect baby, 100% baby. And in a sense, a baby in that state is like a force of nature. When it's hungry, it cries. When it's tired, it sleeps. Everything is just very natural, very easy, and it just lives. And in that sense, there's a kind of a unity there, a kind of a naturalness, a kind of at-homeness in the universe. But then, of course, as we sort of start to grow and develop and mature, we go through this huge long process from basically age 0 up to, well, in our society we say it's till age 18. You could make a case it even takes a little longer, where essentially we go from babyhood to adulthood. And as we do this, as we go through this kind of long process, the key thing that we learn, our defining feature of adulthood, is that we develop the ability to take responsibility for ourselves. When somebody can take responsibility for themselves, our society considers them an adult. And that's a very important process, of course. I've often mentioned a friend of mine who has a girl who she was born an absolutely perfect baby, and she essentially she had a little tiny brain defect where, as her body grew, she never has at all developed this sense of being able to take responsibility for herself. She's now about 20 odd, but she's like a 20-year-old girl with a baby's brain. She can't even hold her head up. She can't eat. She can't walk. She's a baby still, And of course, in many ways, she's a very beautiful being, but there's an awful lot that she will never know, she'll never experience. So it's very important that we go through this kind of process of learning to take responsibility for ourselves. But, of course, there's a bit of a downside. The more we, if you like, the underlying consciousness around the ability to take responsibility for ourselves is that sense of, essentially, this is me and that's the world. And the more heightened this sense becomes, very naturally, the more separate we feel, the more isolated we feel, the more lonely we feel, in the sense of alienation. And it can develop to the sense where we feel like a stranger in a strange land, to some degree. And in a sense, this isn't anything wrong, it's just part of the development of that kind of consciousness, that we feel separate. But it's very difficult to find our happiness within separateness. Within the world of separateness, the world of me and the universe, we live in a world of comparisons, a world of competition, a world of, maybe, I'm doing okay in this front, I'm doing okay in this front, but always there's a sort of an insecurity with it, because, okay, I'm doing all right now, but what about next year? And it doesn't really matter how intelligent we become, how beautiful we are, how rich we are, how well connected we are. All of these things only sort of paper over that fundamental sense of separation, of loneliness, if you like. And so most human adults go through this growth development process, which, finishes perhaps age 18 or 20 or whatever, and they stop there. And so the rest of life then becomes just, if you like, a sort of an accommodation to this fundamental separation or loneliness. So things like having maybe a beautiful family or an important relationship or success in the world become terribly important, not in themselves, but because they distract us from this fundamental sense. But always, whatever we do, however rich we get or however beautiful our family is, it's always gnawing away at the foundations. And so when we go through this process and stop, life is always a tragedy. There's no happy endings within that worldview. Now, that's as far as nature takes us, really. If we just allow this to go to nature to take its course, that's as far as it goes. So nature will, look after the survival instinct, the instinct to breed, things like this. But we still have this drive towards happiness, this drive towards going further than this split, if you like, this separation, this loneliness. And in order to follow through on that drive, we have to help nature along. It doesn't happen by itself. The other things do. This one doesn't. And that helping nature along, Shinzen Roshi, my teacher over in Japan, he likes to talk about this process as going from babyhood to adulthood, and then some people choose to go on to what he likes to call super adulthood, where essentially you still keep the ability to, as it were, be a separate person, making your choices, taking responsibility, making a difference in the world, but also you reconnect with the actual fundamental unity, the fundamental oneness, the fundamental togetherness that's there, that always was there right from the beginning, but that we lose sight of through this long growing separation process. And in order to do that, in order to bring these two worldviews, if you like, or these two consciousnesses together, then we need to do a little bit more. We have to help nature along. And fundamentally, that's the point or the purpose of Zen practice, and perhaps spiritual practice generally. It helps us to find the awareness or the consciousness of non-separation, of non-duality, that place where we're home, where this universe is our home, and we develop a sense of non-split, and in that place of non-split we find a happiness. And it's a happiness that doesn't depend on how many Rolls Royces we've got, or how beautiful our family is, or how intelligent we are. None of those things are relevant. Now, they're all very worthwhile, and they're all important, and it's very good. It's a very good thing to have a beautiful family, to have a life in which you have enough to eat. All of these things are deeply important and valuable. But if we stake our whole well-being on those things, we're always on shaky ground. So there's another place that we can build our ground on. And when we have that place, we can, as it were, play the game of in the other world, but it's not that important. Zen has a saying, shoveling snow into a well. It's like, if you just wait long enough, the snow's going to melt into the well. But nevertheless, we engage in life. We put our lives into shoveling snow into the well. It's because it's important on one level, but on another level, it really doesn't matter. And so our life can take on a kind of a playful quality, where things are important, but they don't matter. And we see this sometimes in the way children play. When I see my little niece having her dolly's tea party, it's very important. But on another level, none of those dollies are going to suffer too much if they don't get their little cups of tea. And our life can take on that quality of ease, that quality of happiness, where on the one hand we can know that everything is all right now. Right now we're living actually in paradise. We're in what in Zen we would call the Buddha land right now. We're all perfect beings living in a perfect world. And also, we live in a world in which there's great suffering, and there are people hurting, and there's work for us to do. And it's very important that we do what we can within that, and what we do makes a difference and has deep value and importance. And we become able to live in both of these worlds at the same time, so that we can know that we're living in paradise, and we can know that we have this important work to do. And our tiny little brains, of course, can't make any sense of this at all. You can't figure it out. There's no kind of calculation that's going to give you the perfect sort of way this shakes down. But we know it on the heart level. We know it on the level of every fibre of our being. And there's another kind of knowing that we develop, which isn't about our intellect, if you like. And so when we develop a spiritual practice, we develop the ability to have a foot in both of these worlds, the world of paradise and the world of our work and our individual commitment to doing what we can to make things better, both at the same time. And it sounds like perhaps a bit of an undertaking, and in some ways it is. In my experience, I've sort of shared this work in different countries and cultures around the world, and so far, in my experience, it's the minority of people who want to basically go through this growth to adulthood, and then on to super adulthood. So far, in my experience, it's a minority. Most people, they just settle. They just settle with, what life has thrown up for them, doing their best within that adulthood world, and perhaps they don't fully recognize the possibility of where it can go from there. But a minority, and a decent sized minority of people, actually are prepared to take that step further, to go on from that place. And even though that number of people, in my experience, is a minority, I think in doing this process, those people become very powerful and have a very powerful influence within society. And that power isn't based on politics and domination and telling people what to do. When somebody is living their life in this place, when somebody is genuinely living in the place where things are all right, where they are in paradise, then that sort of seeps over, affects everybody that they meet. It's us human beings. We're very deeply wired social animals. We tune in to where everybody around us is, if you like, and when we meet a person who is genuinely in this place, it kind of affects us. It sort of helps us as well. So when one person is living in this place, then their influence automatically spreads. It doesn't really matter whether they're a dustman or a hairdresser or running the country. It's kind of the influence is the same, nevertheless. So we've got 3 sessions together during this time here at Gaunt's house, and what I thought is we could sort of unpack, how this is done, how we actually begin to open the door into this new realm, this new reality, and then how we integrate these 2 worlds, if you like, the world of paradise, the world of everything being all right, and the world of our work, the world of suffering, if you like, how we bring these together so that we can actually live the best possible life that we, potentially could do so. So that's what I had in mind for this little time. And there may be people who come and join us and, come and go over the festival, because there's lots of other interesting things going on as well people may get interested in. So, having said that this development from adulthood on to the super adulthood stage, if you like, doesn't happen all by itself. What is it that makes the difference? What is it that actually allows us to continue that growth process, to move on? Well, essentially what it is what we could call practice, spiritual practice. And in Zen, we found that probably the most effective way of practice to engender that development is the practice of meditation. And within Zen meditation, we have actually 3 primary ways of practice which help this growth process to go on. And over our time together, I thought we could tease out one of these, and it's often used as a kind of a foundation for the others. And developing a meditation practice in this way basically starts the process of healing the gap, healing the split, so that we can actually come into our place of happiness, our place of rightness.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider supporting our work with a donation. Visit zenways.org for more information.